The Parisian morning sun had barely broken the horizon when Louise Durand arrived at the headquarters of her supermarket chain. The imposing building, with its glass facade reflecting the first golden rays, looked like a sleeping giant about to wake up for another day of business. Louise, a 32-year-old woman with impeccably styled blonde hair and piercing green eyes, carried with her the weight of managing a family empire. Dressed in an elegant suit that highlighted her authoritative posture, she walked confidently through the corridors, greeting employees with a rehearsed smile until she reached her office on the top floor. As soon as she closed the door behind her, her expression changed. The mask of confidence gave way to a look of concern. Sitting in her leather chair, Louise opened a folder on the table, revealing financial reports and inventories from recent months. "It can't be," she murmured to herself, frowning as she analyzed the numbers. "These figures don't make sense." There were subtle but consistent discrepancies in the stock reports of one of the stores. Small quantities of products were regularly disappearing without any record of sale or return. It was as if they were evaporating into thin air. Louise picked up the phone and dialed her assistant. "Pierre, I need you to come to my office immediately." Minutes later, Pierre, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, entered the room. "Miss Durand, how can I help you?" "Pierre, look at these reports. Do you see what I see?" The assistant examined the documents for a few moments, his eyes widening slightly. "Yes, there are inconsistencies in the stock from the store in the 15th arrondissement. But they're very small amounts, maybe it's just—" "No," Louise interrupted him. "Small amounts that add up over time become a considerable sum. This is not a system error, Pierre. Someone is stealing." "Are you sure, miss? That's a serious accusation." Louise stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of Paris. "I'm almost sure. And I suspect I know who it is." "Who?" "Sarah Laurent," Louise replied, turning to face Pierre. "The manager of that store. She has access to everything, knows the systems, the delivery schedules. It would be easy for her to divert goods without raising immediate suspicion." Pierre looked uncomfortable. "Sarah? But she's been with us for years. She's always been an exemplary employee." "Sometimes, Pierre, people surprise us," Louise said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "But we can't just accuse her without concrete evidence. We need to investigate discreetly." That's when a bold idea came to Louise's mind. Her eyes shone with determination as she turned back to Pierre. "I have a plan," she announced. "I'm going to disguise myself as a new employee and work at the store in the 15th arrondissement. I'll observe Sarah closely and find out what's happening." Pierre was stunned. "Miss Durand, that's risky. What if someone recognizes you?" Louise smiled confidently. "No one will recognize me, Pierre. I'll change my appearance completely. Besides, few store employees know me personally. I'll just be another newcomer." "But, what about your responsibilities here? You'll handle everything for a few weeks. Tell everyone I'm on a business trip abroad. No one will question it." Pierre sighed, recognizing the determination in his boss's eyes. "As you wish, Mississippi. When do you plan to start?" "Immediately," Louise replied, already beginning to plan her transformation. "Prepare the necessary documents for my fictitious hiring. Starting tomorrow, Louise Durand will disappear, and in her place will emerge Sophie Berger, a simple supermarket employee." In the days that followed, Louise dedicated herself to creating her new persona. She dyed her hair brown, adopted thick-rimmed glasses and simple clothes. She practiced a different accent and created a convincing backstory for Sophie. On the morning she would begin her plan, Louise, now Sophie, looked at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. She was nervous but determined. "Let's go, Sophie," she said to her reflection. "It's time to uncover the truth." With her heart racing and a mix of apprehension and excitement, Louise left her luxurious apartment, ready to dive into a world completely different from her own. Little did she know that this investigation would not only reveal the truth about Sarah Laurent but also profoundly change her own perspective on life and business. Louise's first day as Sophie Berger at the supermarket in the 15th arrondissement began early. Dressed in the company's standard uniform, a blue polo shirt and black pants, she easily blended in with the other employees arriving for the morning shift. "Welcome, Sophie," greeted Sarah Laurent, the store manager, with a warm smile. Louise had to restrain her surprise at seeing Sarah in person for the first time. The middle-aged woman, with gray hair and kind eyes, looked nothing like the criminal Louise had imagined. "Thank you, Miss Laurent," Louise replied, remembering to maintain her fake accent. "Please, call me Sarah. Come, I'll show you everything." During the first few hours, Sarah guided Sophie around the store, explaining the procedures, introducing her to colleagues, and teaching her how to operate the cash register. Louise watched attentively, not only to learn her new tasks but also to catch any suspicious signs in Sarah's behavior. As the days passed, Louise adapted to the supermarket routine. She swept the aisles, organized shelves, and assisted customers, always keeping a vigilant eye on Sarah. However, to her frustration, she couldn't notice anything extraordinary in the manager's behavior. It was only at the end of the first week that Louise noticed something unusual. While putting away some products in the storage area, she saw Sarah entering discreetly, looking around as if checking if she was alone. Hidden behind a stack of boxes, Louise watched Sarah take some items from the shelves, a package of rice, a few cans of beans, a bottle of cooking oil, and some personal hygiene products. Carefully, Sarah placed everything into a paper bag. Louise's heart raced. So that's how she does it, she thought, feeling a mix of triumph and disappointment. In the following days, Louise paid even more attention to Sarah's movements at the end of each shift. The pattern repeated, always in the last minutes before closing the store, Sarah would discreetly separate some items, mostly non-perishable food and essential products. One night, Louise managed to find an excuse to stay late, helping to close the register. She saw Sarah leaving through the back of the store, carrying the now familiar bag. "Sophie, dear, are you still here?" Sarah's voice surprised her. Louise turned, trying to appear casual. "Oh, yes. I was just finishing checking the register. Everything's set now." Sarah smiled, but Louise noticed a slight nervousness in her eyes. "Great job. But you don't need to stay so late. Go home and rest." "Of course, thank you, Sarah." "Good night," replied Louise, watching carefully as Sarah hurriedly left. That night, lying in her luxurious bed, a stark contrast to the role she was playing, Louise reflected on her observations. The evidence seemed clear, Sarah was indeed taking goods from the store without paying for them. However, something bothered Louise. Sarah's behavior during the day, her kindness to customers and employees, her dedication to her work, all seemed incompatible with the image of a thief. "Maybe it's just a very well-crafted facade," Louise murmured to herself, trying to dismiss the doubt that was starting to settle in her mind. Determined to obtain concrete proof, Louise planned her next move. She needed to find out what Sarah did with the items after leaving the store. Was she part of a larger scheme to resell stolen products? With this question in mind, Louise fell asleep, her determination renewed. Tomorrow, she would take the next step in her investigation, unaware that the answers she would find would completely change not only her perception of Sarah but of the entire world around her. The following night, Louise was prepared. She had swapped her uniform for discreet, dark clothes, perfect for going unnoticed in the streets of Paris after dark. With her heart racing, she waited for Sarah to leave the store, watching from a distance as the manager walked briskly, carrying the now familiar paper bag. Now, Louise thought, taking a deep breath before starting her silent pursuit. Sarah followed busy streets, skillfully blending into the crowd of Parisians returning home after a long day of work. Louise kept a safe distance, alternating between sidewalks to avoid being noticed. As they continued, Louise realized they were moving away from the cosmopolitan center of Paris. The elegant buildings and chic boutiques gave way to simpler, older structures. The streets, once wide and well-lit, became narrower and darker. Where is she going? Louise wondered, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension growing in her chest. After almost an hour of walking, Sarah finally left the main streets, entering a visibly poorer neighborhood. Louise hesitated for a moment before following. This was not the type of place she usually frequented, and for the first time since she began her investigation, she felt truly out of her comfort zone. The houses here were small and cramped, many of them with worn facades begging for a new coat of paint. Children played on the narrow sidewalks while the elderly chatted in chairs positioned at their doorways, enjoying the evening's coolness. Sarah greeted several people along the way, her warm smile lighting up her tired face. It was evident that she knew the neighborhood and its residents well. Louise watched, intrigued, as Sarah stopped in front of a small apartment building. The manager rang the bell of one of the ground-floor apartments, and soon the door opened, revealing a frail-looking elderly lady. "Good evening, Madame Rousseau," Louise heard Sarah say affectionately. "I brought some things for you." The lady smiled, her wrinkles deepening around her eyes. "Oh, Sarah, you are an angel. Please, come in." Sarah disappeared into the apartment, leaving Louise outside, confused and curious. 15 minutes later, Sarah emerged, her bag visibly lighter. The scene repeated several times throughout the night. Sarah visited a young single mother with 2 small children, a middle-aged man recovering from an illness, and even an improvised shelter for homeless people. At each stop, Sarah distributed the items she had brought from the supermarket: food, hygiene products, sometimes even clothes and blankets. She conversed with each person, offering not just material help but also words of comfort and encouragement. Louise watched everything from afar, feeling a confusing mix of emotions. The anger and disappointment she had initially felt upon suspecting Sarah gave way to a reluctant admiration and a growing sense of shame. When Sarah finally headed to her own home, a modest apartment in the same neighborhood, Louise remained standing in the street for a long time, absorbing everything she had witnessed. The reality of the situation hit her with full force. Sarah was not an ordinary thief, stealing for personal gain. She was risking her job, her reputation, everything, to help people in need who society often overlooked. Louise felt tears forming in her eyes. How could she have judged Sarah so harshly? How could she have been so blind to the reality of poverty that existed just a few kilometers from her luxurious office? Walking slowly back to her own apartment, Louise felt deeply shaken. Her investigation had revealed much more than she expected, not about Sarah, but about herself and the world around her. That night, lying in her king-sized bed, Louise couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with images of the poor neighborhood, the people Sarah helped, and the enormous disparities that existed in her own city. She knew she couldn't simply return to her normal life after this. Something needed to be done. But what? And how? With these questions weighing on her mind, Louise finally fell asleep, knowing that at dawn, she would have difficult decisions to make. In the days following her discovery, Louise continued her disguise as Sophie, but now with a new purpose. She watched Sarah with new eyes, noticing details she had previously ignored: the tiredness on her face, the way she occasionally checked the prices of the most basic items, the genuine affection with which she treated every customer. One afternoon, while organizing a shelf, Louise overheard a conversation between Sarah and another employee, Claire. "Sarah, you look exhausted. Is everything okay?" Claire asked, concerned. Sarah smiled weakly. "I'm fine, dear. I just had a busy night. My neighbor, Mr. Durand, had a relapse, and I had to help him get to the hospital." "Oh, poor thing. But Sarah, you need to take care of yourself too." You can't carry the problems of the whole neighborhood on your shoulders. Sarah sighed. I know, Claire. But if it's not us, then who? Louise felt a lump in her throat. Sarah's dedication went far beyond what she had imagined. Determined to fully understand the situation, Louise decided to follow Sarah again, this time paying attention to every detail. On a Wednesday, after the workday ended, Louise saw Sarah heading not to the supermarket but to a small local grocery store. Inside, Sarah bought several items with her own money: milk, bread, fresh fruit, and even some over-the-counter medications. So that's how it is, Louise thought, feeling a mix of admiration and guilt. Sarah was not only distributing items from the supermarket but also spending her own salary to help others. Following Sarah through the neighborhood, Louise witnessed scenes that would break anyone's heart. In a small apartment, Sarah delivered milk and fruit to a young mother with a baby in her arms. In another, she helped an elderly man take his medication, ensuring he had enough food for the week. Sarah, you're an angel, said a lady with tears in her eyes upon receiving a bag of groceries. I don't know what we would do without you. Don't say that, Madame Lefebvre, Sarah replied gently. We're all a community. We help each other. Louise watched, hidden in the shadows, feeling her heart tighten. She had never witnessed such a level of compassion and altruism. In a particularly moving moment, Sarah stopped at a small park where several homeless people gathered. She distributed blankets, warm socks, and sandwiches she had prepared at home. How are you feeling today, Jean? Louise heard her ask a middle-aged man in worn-out clothes. Better, Sarah, he replied with a tired smile. That cough medicine you brought really helped. Sarah smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. I'm glad to hear that. Remember, the community clinic will be open on Saturday. Promise me you'll go for a full checkup. Jean nodded, visibly moved by Sarah's concern. Throughout the night, Louise saw Sarah empty her bag and pockets, giving everything she had to those in need. When she finally returned home, late at night, Sarah looked exhausted, but there was a glow of satisfaction in her eyes. Louise, on the other hand, felt completely transformed. The woman she had suspected of theft was, in fact, an unsung heroine, sacrificing her own comfort for the good of others. That night, back in her luxurious apartment, Louise cried. She cried with shame for her hasty judgments, with admiration for Sarah, and with sadness for the harsh reality she had witnessed. As she looked out the window at the illuminated city, Louise knew she could no longer pretend she hadn't seen what she had. Something needed to change, and she was determined to be part of that change. With this resolution in mind, Louise began to plan her next step. She knew that simply returning to her previous life was no longer an option. The question now was, how could she use her position and resources to make the difference that Sarah was making, but on a much larger scale? In the days that followed, Louise delved even deeper into her investigation, but now with a completely different purpose. She was no longer looking for evidence of a crime but trying to understand the extent of Sarah's kindness and the impact her actions had on the community. Each day brought new revelations that left Louise increasingly impressed and, at the same time, ashamed of her previous judgments. On a Saturday morning, Louise saw Sarah arrive at work earlier than usual, carrying a mysterious box. Curious, she followed her discreetly to the back of the store, where Sarah began setting up what appeared to be a small makeshift library. "What are you doing, Sarah?" asked one of the passing employees. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I'm setting up a reading corner for the neighborhood kids. Many of them don't have access to books at home. I thought we could make a difference, even if it's just with a few stories." Louise felt her heart tighten. Sarah's generosity seemed limitless. On another occasion, Louise witnessed Sarah consoling an elderly customer who had lost her wallet. "Don't worry, Madame Dupont," Sarah said gently. "We'll take your groceries to your home, and you can pay whenever you can. I trust you." The gratitude in the lady's eyes was evident, and Louise realized that Sarah was doing much more than just selling products. She was building a community based on trust and compassion. A particularly memorable day was when Louise saw Sarah organizing a small surprise party for one of the younger employees who had passed the entrance exam. "You did it, Antoine," exclaimed Sarah, hugging the emotional young man. "I knew you could do it. We're all so proud of you." Louise watched, with a lump in her throat, as Sarah gathered the team, bought a small cake, and even a gift, a set of pens that Antoine could use at the university. As the days passed, Louise felt increasingly guilty for her initial suspicions. She now saw that Sarah was not just a dedicated employee but the beating heart of the community. Her small acts of kindness, her attention to detail, and her genuine compassion were making a real difference in people's lives. One evening, after work, Louise followed Sarah to a local community center. There, to her surprise, she saw Sarah leading a literacy class for adults. With patience and kindness, she helped people of all ages learn to read and write, offering them a chance to improve their lives. "You are doing very well," Louise heard Sarah say to the students. "Remember, it's never too late to learn. Every word you master is a step toward a better future." At that moment, Louise felt tears streaming down her cheeks. How could she have misjudged someone so extraordinary? The guilt she felt was almost overwhelming. Reflecting on everything she had witnessed, Louise realized that Sarah was not just helping individuals, she was weaving a web of support and hope that sustained the entire community. Her actions, though technically against company rules, were saving and improving lives in ways Louise had never considered. The realization that she, as heir and executive of the supermarket chain, was so distant from this reality made her question her entire value system. Louise began to wonder, what really mattered? Profits and efficiency, or the well-being of people and the community? With each passing day, Louise's admiration for Sarah grew, as did her determination to do something meaningful. She knew she couldn't simply return to her previous life pretending nothing had changed. The question now was, how could she use her position and resources to support and amplify the work Sarah was doing? Louise knew she had a difficult decision ahead. She would have to confront not only Sarah but also her own beliefs and how her company operated. With a heavy heart but filled with a new determination, Louise began to plan her next step. The following morning, Louise arrived at the supermarket earlier than usual. Her heart was racing as she mentally rehearsed what she would say to Sarah. Dressed in her Sophie uniform, she waited in the employee room, knowing that Sarah was always the first to arrive. When the door opened and Sarah entered, Louise took a deep breath. "Sarah, can I talk to you in private?" Sarah nodded, a slight smile on her lips. "Of course, Sophie. Or should I say, Louise?" Louise froze, her eyes widening in shock. You knew." Sarah laughed softly. "From the first day, dear. You can't hide who you really are, no matter how good the disguise." Louise felt her legs weaken and sat down, stunned. "But, how? Why didn't you say anything?" Sarah sat beside her, her eyes kind. "I wanted you to see for yourself. Sometimes we need to step out of our comfort zone to truly understand the world around us." I don't know what to say," Louise stammered. "I came here thinking you were stealing, and now you know the truth," Sarah completed softly. "I'm not proud of breaking company rules, Louise. But when you see so much need, so much pain, sometimes the rules seem small in comparison." Louise felt tears forming in her eyes. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I judged you so wrongly. What you do here, for the community, is incredible." Sarah smiled, placing a comforting hand on Louise's shoulder. "Don't blame yourself. You came, saw, and learned. That's what matters. But why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you come to me or the company board?" Sarah sighed. "Louise, dear, do you really think the board would care about a few families in a poor neighborhood? In this world of profits and numbers, we sometimes forget that there are real people behind the statistics. Louise felt the weight of these words. It was true. How many times had she herself ignored the realities beyond the financial reports? "I want to help," said Louise, her voice firm. "Not just you, Sarah, but the whole community. We can do more, much more." Sarah looked at her with a mix of surprise and hope. "You really want this?" "Yes," Louise replied without hesitation. "What you do here is the true purpose of a business. Not just selling products, but serving the community. I want to transform our company, make it an example of social responsibility." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Oh, Louise. You don't know how much this means. But I need your help," Louise continued. "You know the real needs of the people. Together, we can create programs that truly make a difference." Sarah nodded, emotional. "It will be an honor to work with you on this project, Louise." The two women embraced, a moment of mutual understanding and respect passing between them. "So, what do we do now?" asked Sarah. Louise smiled, feeling a new energy and purpose. "Now, we start planning. We have a lot of work ahead, but together, we can make the real difference this community deserves." As the sun rose outside, lighting up the city, Louise and Sarah began to map out the first steps of a new era for the company and the community. What started as an investigation of suspected theft had turned into the beginning of a revolution of compassion and social responsibility. As Louise and Sarah discussed their initial plans to transform the company, a sudden silence fell over the room. Sarah seemed to hesitate as if gathering courage to say something important. "Louise," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know about me and why this is all so important to me." Louise nodded, encouraging her to continue. Sarah took a deep breath. "I grew up in this neighborhood. In fact, on the same street where we delivered food last night." Louise's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained silent, allowing Sarah to continue. "My family was very poor. Many nights, we went to bed hungry. I saw my mother cry silently, thinking no one was watching, because she didn't have anything to put on the table for us." Sarah's voice faltered, and she paused to compose herself. "Growing up there, you don't just see poverty, you feel it in every fiber of your being. Every person I help now, Louise, I see my family, my neighbors, my childhood friends." Louise felt a lump in her throat, moved by the revelation. Sarah continued, her words now flowing urgently, "This job, Louise, is not just a job for me. It's my way of giving back, of making the difference I wished someone had made when I was a child." Suddenly, Sarah grabbed Louise's hands, her eyes pleading. "Please, Louise, I know I broke the rules, but don't fire me. This job is the only way I have to help these people. Without it, Louise didn't let Sarah finish. On impulse, she stood up and hugged Sarah tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Sarah," said Louise, her voice choked with emotion. "I would never, ever think of firing you. You are exactly the kind of person we need, not just in this store, but throughout our entire chain." Sarah sobbed with relief in Louise's arms. Gently pulling away, Louise held Sarah's shoulders, looking into her eyes. "In fact, Sarah, I want to do more than just keep your job. I want you to lead a new program in our company." Sarah blinked, confused. "A new program?" Louise smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "Yes. An official donation and community support program, implemented across our entire supermarket chain. And I want you to be at the forefront of it." I don't know what to say," Sarah stammered, clearly emotional. "Say you'll accept," replied Louise with a gentle smile. "Your experience, your compassion, your knowledge of the real needs of the community, all of this is invaluable. Together, we can transform what you do here into something much bigger." Sarah nodded, tears of joy in her eyes. Yes, yes, I accept. Thank you, Louise. You don't know how much this means. No, Sarah, Louise said softly. It's you who doesn't know how much you mean to me. You opened my eyes to a reality I ignored. Now, we have the chance to make a real difference. The two women embraced again, this time as partners in a shared mission. So, where do we start? Sarah asked, wiping away the tears. Louise smiled, feeling energized and determined. We start right now. Let's draft a detailed plan, present it to the board, and make this company an example of how businesses can and should be a force for good in society. As the sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating Paris, Louise and Sarah began working on their new project. What started as a suspicion of theft had turned into the beginning of a revolution of compassion and corporate social responsibility. And so, in that small employee room of a supermarket in the suburbs of Paris, a partnership was born that promised to change not just a community but potentially the entire concept of how businesses can interact with and support the communities they serve.